Coming up on Regarding Men, APA Division 51 asks regarding men a question. Paul Elam responds.
And hello there. I'm Paul Elam with paulelam.com. Welcome to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die. And I am joined today, as always, by my two favorite men's advocates and two of my favorite people on this planet, actually. That would be Janice Fiamingo. I am saying this in order of importance.
I was going to say, you said her first.
And Tom Golden from Men Are Good.
Men are good, even if second.
Yes, they are. Well, most men are good. I would say men are good, but we're going to be talking about Division 51 of the American Psychological Association today. And so we can't really say that all men are good. Some men are very, very malignantly ideological and dangerous to other people. I want to talk about that some today. First, in general, as most of you know, the Division 51 of the American Psychological Association is the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinity. And as you will see on their acknowledgement pages, they're all about masculinity as long as it fits into the gay, lesbian, amputee mold.
Can you bring up their site, Tom?
Yeah, let's do that because we're not exaggerating here. The first thing that this society that is for the psychological study of men, and it used to be Men and Masculinity. Now it's Men and Masculinities, of course. Naturally, they recognize feminist scholarship as the foundation for all of their work. So what can I say? We're turning to an ideology that doesn't like men, doesn't much care about their issues, except as how those issues relate to women. And that's the lens through which they're going to study masculinity. And guess what, folks? It shows.
Yes.
And it shows in a lot of ways. I put together, I'm just going to sort of semi-read a couple of things here. There are several things that the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinities does not seem to grasp in their alleged concerns with men and men's issues. Primarily, one of the things that you'll see throughout this, I'm going to reference this in the exchange. I had an email exchange with the president-elect of the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinities, and you'll see that they're really interested in vulnerable men. They like men that bare their souls and share their feelings and sit around in circles, Oprah style, passing Kleenex and talking about their grievances. That's how they want to see men behave. And so to a large degree, they treat men as defective women, that if they can just get men into the mode of emoting like they imagine, of course, this requires a really ridiculous stereotype of women too. They have the stereotype of women that they are the ones that sit around and cry all the time about their problems, and they want men to emulate that because that's them being vulnerable, which they equate to some sort of therapeutic progress. I'd argue that's total bullshit and shows a definite lack of understanding about men. One of the things that they do in this model of trying to get men to emote and to talk and express feelings in the manner that they perceive women doing is that they totally dismiss the tendency in men to handle things kinetically in their lives. When men experience loss, when they go through things, what do? They'll take action. They will start working on things, doing things. This is how men grieve.
Yep.
Often they get through this, and it doesn't have any. Now, again, nobody, and I'm sure that one of the ideologues at SPSMM would watch this and say, "Oh, they want men to shut up and not share their feelings." That's not the case at all. Men do share their feelings, but they also are raised, and I think quite rightly, to put their feelings, their emotional lives in perspective and to master those feelings, and then to take on emotional tasks by working through them, by telling their story. The problem with ideological groups like this is at the moment men start actually talking about their real story, their lived experience, what's the first thing they do? They tell them to shut up.
Mhm.
They say, "Tell us your feelings." And the guy says, "Well, I'm angry." And they say, "Oh, you're just an angry guy. You need you put your anger in check." Well, wait a minute. I thought you wanted to hear my feelings. Well, not those feelings.
Yeah.
Hear other feelings that make us feel like you're emulating a woman. And I wish I were making this up, but it's not. They treat masculinity as a pathology.
Yeah.
That's an interesting trait in a group that pretends to study men and address their psychological mental health needs. They treat it as a pathology. As a matter of fact, if we can get the graphic up there for the Mascupathy, we will see that they have joined two words, masculinity and pathology, to make Mascupathy. And so when the ideologues tell you, "Oh no, we don't demonize all men, we don't demonize masculinity, we're not treating masculinity itself like it's a pathology," they're lying to you. That's exactly what they're doing. Mm. And you guys feel free to jump in anytime here. Their focus, I'm asserting here, is on social engineering, not on men's mental health needs. Mm-hmm. They could care less about men's mental health needs. They want to shape men into something that meets the approval of feminist ideologues. And what meets the approval of feminist ideologues is men with no balls, and men with no spine, and men without anger, and men without needs, and men without lived experience that might not paint women in the greatest light. But what's also interesting about all these guys is that they can't embrace and look at any of men's real issues, because if they did do that, it would be career suicide. Yeah. If they started talking about men experience in family courts, their alienation from their children, the experience of men who have been falsely accused of sexual crimes or being sexually inappropriate. If they started looking at those issues, and those are the issues that, by the way, guys, when we talk to men regarding men in our mini groups that we're running day in and day out at regardingmen.com, they do tell us these stories. This is their lived experience.
Yes.
But when you try to talk to Michael Kimmel or to Christopher Kilmartin or what's his name, Ronald Levant, any of these guys that are part of these ideological groups about what men actually suffer from, they totally shut down. They cannot hear it. Because if they accept any notion of men's real lived experience, they're done professionally. They will never find favor again. And so they're invested. It's interesting. Here they are with all this facade of studying men and masculinity, and they are wholly 100% invested in not hearing what men's issues really are. To them, men's issues is they're not comfortable enough with homosexuality. Another men's issue is that they're oppressive patriarchs, and they are drunk on their power, and they're into control. Not they're powerless in the family or any of their actual lived experience. We go on and on here. So men's issues are completely sold out for ideology. Um, Also, another wonderful thing about these, and I just call them fools. Have you ever heard a male feminist ever address reproductive strategy and the impact of feminizing men on their sex lives?
Nope.
I don't suppose.
Wonder why not,
Well,
Paul?
well, and it's really interesting because if men became what Division 51 wanted them to become, none of them would get laid. Let's just be really honest. You know, women are attracted to masculinity itself,
Mm-hmm.
to strength, to self-assuredness, to competence, to strength, just what men provide in the world. And what do the ideologues talk about? Well, you're really strong when you're being vulnerable and crying.
Yeah.
Tell you what, take
Mm-hmm.
your date to see a movie and then get out your handkerchief and start dabbing your eyes during the movie. And then tell me about how your luck was later that night when the movie was over. I want to hear about it. No, guys, like male feminists, and sometimes I think they're trying to just curb the competition. That if they can get enough men to be obsequious, weak, little limp-wristed milk toasts, uh, they can maybe have a better chance with women. I don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? What is the payoff for these guys pulling in a bunch of men and saying, "Okay, now start crying whenever you feel hurt," and then
Um,
we'll tell you that's a
I
good model of
think one of
masculinity.
the payoffs is that it pleases their feminist masters. It pleases the feminists. It pleases the ideologues that they're flowing from. You know,
Yeah.
that's the problem. Men are the problem. The problem is they're not enough like women. I mean, literally, when I was on the Division 151 mailing list, literally someone wrote that things will get better as soon as men can start acting like women. Oh, what, are you kidding me? But that's the underlying idea there. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I
Boy,
mean,
oh boy.
And it
it
goes like this
must,
to real men. It goes like that to men who are
yeah,
masculine. You can't
yeah.
see them.
And they
Sad.
don't want any part of that. Two more quick items here. Another thing that they do, and we see this over and over again. You'll see this in the world of mental health when you see these ideologues that have been steeped in all of this indoctrination. They come in, they encourage men to be vulnerable and open with their emotions. Then they shame and punish them when they express anger or any emotions that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't fit their model.
Not the
I mean,
tender
I can't
ones.
think what's a sicker type of interaction. I mean, you're supposed to develop, call it a therapeutic alliance. You're supposed to form a bond with your clients with unconditional positive regard. And
Mm-hmm.
how can you do that when you bring them in under the banner of mascupathy or something like that? How can anybody feel like they're unconditionally accepted? I mean, the whole idea is premised on you're wrong, you need to
Yeah.
change it. And finally, the one thing that really gets me about these guys is that they operate in complete ignorance of gynocentrism.
Yeah.
Try to talk to Michael Kimmel or any of these guys about gynocentrism. They'll be
Right.
scratching their heads saying, "What are you talking about?
Right. Right.
There's no gynocentrism in the world." And
Yeah.
so gynocentrism is the most powerful force there is in the lives of men,
Yes.
in the way that it affects them interpersonally, how it affects their family life, professional life, how they behave in public these days.
And it's invisible.
Gynocentrism is a huge part of it. And the male feminist establishment has to operate on the premise that it doesn't exist because patriarchy is what they believe exists, and
Yeah.
they think that's very real.
Yep.
They may have some arguments to make about some of that, but to operate in this vacuum that doesn't see gynocentrism, that doesn't understand reproductive strategy for men and what an attraction theory and what attracts men and women together. They operate in as though that we can just operate as a species without any of that being in play.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's absolutely crazy.
It, it surely is. Yeah, I mean, Tom, can we go back to the Division 51 homepage document? Is it possible to make larger the bullet points there? Well,
Oh,
that one is is very good. I mean,
it's possible.
they're all just. I mean, I find this one of the most useful documents on the internet today in terms of understanding, especially where psychotherapy for men is heading, and the very hostile environment for any man who is seeking, any kind of therapeutic support, because this is just incredible. This, as you said, Paul, this is a mass social engineering project. It is about reforming men's subjectivities, remolding their whole way of being in the world, rather than actually meeting them where they are and listening to them and helping them deal with
Exactly.
whatever problems they're encountering.
Exactly.
It's it's not even hidden. That's the thing that I find so flabbergasting and interesting about this site. They don't even try to hide it. They come right out here in this bullet point that they acknowledge their historical debt to feminist inspired scholarship on gender. In other words, they admit right there that they agree with feminists that gender is a social construct, that masculinity is created through dominance and oppression, that men, by their accident of birth, are members of an oppressor class, particularly white men, of course, and that their primary commitments are not to the individuals who come to them with their particular personal circumstances and particular personal pain and suffering, but to groups of people, and that their attitude towards the person sitting across from them is conditioned entirely by ideology about that person's group identity. I mean, that to me is everything that psychotherapy shouldn't be. It is grotesque. What a perversion. I mean, what it says here, it commits itself to the support of groups. I don't want to be supported as a group. If I go to psychotherapy, I want to be supported as an individual. And then here it is. I mean, how bizarre that in a web page devoted supposedly to men, to the study of men and masculinities, they foreground their support of women, gays, and lesbians, and they don't mention supporting men at all. I mean, well, people of color, I guess if you're a man of color, that will be the lens through which you might hope to get a little bit of empathy, of a very ideologically tainted sort of empathy for your experience as a person of color, but not for your experience as a man of color. I mean, it's yeah, I just don't know what to say about this. Each one of these bullet points is so objectionable on every level. To imagine that you're a broken man suffering for whatever reason, because you're going through the divorce from hell, because you haven't been able to see your kids, because you've lost a child, a child has died, some horrific thing, or you've lost your job, or you're just at sea in terms of relationships and who you are in the world. And you go there and you're meeting with somebody who wants to change you and wants to force you to agree with their ideology, that you belong to an oppressor class, and that the way you're going to become a better person is to accept that and apologize for it and learn a totally different feminist inspired way of being in the world. I can't say enough about how sick it is.
And let's don't miss, Tom, if you could put that bullet point, can you put that back up for a second?
Sure.
Because there's something at the end of that I want to make perfectly clear, that it says people of color that have been uniquely oppressed by the gender, class, race system. Let's dispense with the euphemisms. What they're talking about there when they say gender, class, race system, they're talking about white men.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's that's who they mean. Their implication is that gender, class, race system that oppresses and hurts everybody so much is unique to and embodied by the white male.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what they're teaching. It's pure bigotry.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yep.
And I just want to make sure that we notice that as we go through their little bullet points here, which I agree with Janice. They're just horrible.
It's
pretty bad.
Yeah. It's
Pretty bad.
really amazing.
And
You
the
know,
worst-
and even yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Janice. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that even that idea, you know, they say at the beginning, I think the first one, they promote the critical study of gender and how it shapes and constricts men's lives. You know, in some way, you know, I would agree with that. Yes, sir, and we all would, I think, you know, and we've talked
Right.
about that over and over again on this show about the way in which gender constricts men's lives and notions of chivalry, you know, notions of you know, what a good man owes to his family and to his woman and to his society, the debt of self-sacrifice that men take on and are expected to take on. Yeah, in some ways, yes, that is gender as a social construct. Constricting and shaping men's lives. But that's not what they're talking about here, really. And what they are talking about is that gender is entirely a social construct, which they believe means that they have free rein to reshape men in the preferred mold. And if you're a man who doesn't fit that preferred mold, then you're out of luck. You're not going to meet with somebody who is able to understand the impulses of your lives, who's not going to be able to accept your values, who's not going to help you to live up to the values that you hold. You're just going to be told that you're wrong and that you need to be fundamentally transformed by this ideology before you're even acceptable as a man within this schema. I mean, it couldn't be worse if you were in the Soviet Union during its most oppressive era, or, you know, Maoist China during the Cultural Revolution, and you were being told that you had to support the revolution and, you know, you had to sacrifice everything you believed in order to conform to the revolutionary script. This is exactly what this is. And it is hideous to think of vulnerable men going and being subjected to just a really malicious form of brainwashing.
Yes.
And you know, if you've read Solzhenitsyn and you understand anything about the Gulag era Soviet Union, you know that the vast predominant numbers of people that they put in Siberia were in actual mental health facilities. The theory being that if you disagreed with the state, there must be something wrong with your mind. And that is a great segue into talking about how we came to do this talk to begin with. This started with an email that I was tagged into by Warren Farrell, where he was having some kind of discussion with a man named Daniel Ellensberg, who's now the president-elect of Division 51. And they had brought up a 2014 Time article that was written after the first International Conference on Men's Issues. And they were expressing, not Warren, mind you, but the people who sent this to him were expressing concerns about quotes from Paul Elam in there. I mean, they went back all these years to an old article and bringing it up to Warren as though he's supposed to do something about it. So Warren did the really brilliant thing. He replied and copied me on the email so I could be part of the festivities of the people judging me. But one of the things that came up and that Daniel Ellensberg asked me was that why we, at Regarding Men, in a talk titled "Why Men Can't Trust Psychotherapy," had a picture of one of his colleagues. Andrew
Smiler.
Andrew Smiler, yes, one of the generic male feminist units in that branch of the world. People that take mental health services and pass off ideological mind warping under the guise of mental health. But they wanted to know why that we used his picture and on this discussion of why men don't therapy. And I replied to that, and I'll if you want to put up the first part of that, Tom.
Well, let's do
I
that.
won't read the whole thing word for word, but
And
I
it's
will.
worth it, guys. Pause the video and read the whole thing, because this response that Paul gave to them is absolutely stunning.
I just said, and I'll skip the third paragraph here. As someone who's worked with men for 35 years, I personally witnessed a departure from honest scholarly investigation and into strict adherence to feminine's ideological dogma. That dogma has taken us from men having problems to men being the problem.
Good.
It's a shaming, counter-therapeutic message that I must in good conscience reject. I've also been sadly aware of the abuse of psychological researchers and other professionals who have been maligned and professionally savaged for daring to reach conclusions and publish papers that do not fit the feminist narrative, particularly in the area of partner violence. And on that,
Murray Strauss, anyone?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
yes, linked him to Murray Strauss. I mean, and this is his crowd. Let's be real honest about this. What Murray Strauss wrote about this distortion of evidence and the abuse and mistreatment of researchers who reach the wrong conclusions according to feminist doctrine. This is Mr. Ellensberg's crowd. This is his peer group that we're talking about. All these guys. So when you ask why would we, put Smiler on there, we could put a lot more up there. There's a lot, and I'm glad we got a group picture of some of this that I'm going to use for the thumbnail on this video discussion. But these are the people that are pawning off ideological brainwashing under the guise of mental health. I mean, that is to me one of the most depraved, sickening things you can possibly do. To pretend to help people at the most vulnerable time of their lives. And then saying, well, what we're really here for is for me to shape you in ideologically to what I want to see, which is, well, we've got all kinds of words for therapists that behave that way.
Yes.
And none of them are good. This is horrible, horrible behavior. And Division 51 is ground zero of this horrible behavior. Yeah. That's why we use Smiler's picture, and that's why we'll do it again. And if you want to, we can move on to the second part of this.
All right, here we go.
Because I think there's another part here that needs to be discussed. Anyway, I said, personally, I know two individuals who were removed from Division 51 discussion boards for talking about men as victims of domestic violence versus perpetrators. The clear message in this is that departure from the feminist orthodoxy will not be tolerated. That orthodoxy, with its warped view of men and masculinity, is on full display in the APA's 2018 guidelines for psychological practice with men and boys. We'll link that below too, if you want to read a sick document.
Oh boy.
Man, those guidelines are much more of a political document than anything grounded in sound and objective scholarship. And in my personal view, they're an absolute disgrace to the profession, as is Division 51 itself. And here's the part that I really want to get at, that I think that if anything, we can have a little bit of a happy ending here in a discussion like this. It is interesting. In the work with regarding men, we put forth a public message that psychological education and practice has been infected with anti-male bias, which it most certainly has, and that men would benefit from a model that doesn't chastise them as a perpetrator class, nor as the beneficiaries of some misguided notion of privilege. And they have flocked to it, bringing their very real problems and seeking solutions. I'd wager there's a lesson in that for those who genuinely want to engage and help men. And there is. What we
Amen.
find with all these concerns we see out of toxic masculinity and men being angry, and the way that organizations like Division 51 have sought to demonize people like us over the years, which they certainly, that email campaign that Warren ended up on, that was an effort to demonize us.
Right.
That's exactly what they were trying to do. And what we find, though, is that when we get in and work with these men and we actually fucking listen to them, to their lived experience, to who they are, to what has hurt them, what helps them, what makes them feel good, feel bad, actually meeting them on their terms, they don't sit around and talk about how shitty women are. They don't sit around and stew in their anger. Very quickly, once they connect to the idea that they're actually being heard, they talk about all kinds of things. And they talk about the growth in their lives. And then we see this huge amount of collective wisdom coming up out of the group.
Yep.
All these men
Yep.
reaching out to each other, hearing each other, listening to each other. And that is wasted on these guys that are just doing their ideological best to screw things up. They're not listening to men.
Yeah.
They're telling you they're not listening to men. They're telling you that they need to put men into a mold, and that's what all their little groups, Mascupathy, Division 51, that's all the guidelines for working with men, goes right to men's privilege, right to men's toxicity. That's their guidelines. I mean, what the fuck are these people thinking?
It's unbelievable, really.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be so
Yeah.
bad except that Division 51 and the APA are like at the top of the pinnacle of the mental health system in the United States.
Scary.
They're the ones that determine who's going to get into which program, and they've got a lot of power. And so all these young students come up, bright guys, and they've got no choice. You know, either they go along with the system or they don't probably get any place. It's really sad. It's terribly sad.
Yeah, I
But
mean, the
Paul-
only way I guess that you could operate would be to outwardly conform to the orthodoxy and mouth the rhetoric about mascupathy and toxic masculinity and men as part of an oppressor group, white men anyway,
Yeah.
and then in your own private practice, quietly conduct things completely differently, throw all that stuff out and actually meet men where they
I think
are
that's
with
exactly
a male
right,
positive.
Janice. When I was on the
And
division,
you know,
when I was on their mailing list, I would stick up for men, and I'd say men are good, you know, and talk about the goodness in men. And
No wonder they got rid of you.
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
But what would happen would be I'd get emails from other guys from the list, usually younger guys. They'd say, I wish I could support you, but I can't. Because if I did, I wouldn't get this XYZ, whatever. I got a number of messages like that, which taught me
Yeah.
that, you know, there's guys, just like Janice said, who love men and are going to want to work with men, but have to go along with this pathological crap in order to get where they need to go. It's really sad. It's terribly
Yeah.
sad. But Paul,
Unfortunately, there is a number, I think, of therapists out there that, you know, went through that indoctrination and left it behind when
Yes.
they went into.
I'm
to
sure there are
actual
people
work.
like that. I hope.
Yeah.
But Paul, what was your response to, what did he respond when you sent this note to him?
Well, the thing is that the first, yeah, that was the response. Well, it's really interesting because he said at the beginning of the exchange that he really wanted to talk to me. He really wanted to find out why that we used Andrew Smiley's picture and why I felt the way I did. And he wanted to ask me about, I guess, about the quotes from 2014 Time magazine. I don't even remember what the fuck they wrote. But he wanted to ask about all that. And then when he got this answer, he suddenly got real busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good, Paul, but I've got a lot to do with on my plate right now with Division 51. Maybe we'll talk sometime. Bye.
Can't
That
deal
was
with it.
pretty much the response.
Can't deal with
No.
it. And you know,
Well, no, and he can't have this conversation.
right.
And
If
for that,
he's
I
stuck.
have some amount of sympathy.
Yes. If he did have the conversation, he would get pilloried, you know?
Yes. But you got to know, and I'll say this without reservation, whatever this guy did, if he was capable of getting elected as the president of Division 51, he's rotten to the fucking core. I guarantee it. Nobody's going to get put in that job unless they pass every kind of ideological litmus and smell test.
Yeah.
It would never get the votes.
That's probably true. That's probably true. You know, you mentioned the 2018 guidelines, and one of the things we'll link below is Jordan Peterson's response to that, which is just so condemning and just so perfect. And one of the things he points out is that in their push for this socialization idea, they say that the problem is fathers teaching traditional masculinity to these boys,
Right.
and that creates violence. La 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 la, right? But Peterson says, wait a minute, that's completely opposite of what all the research says. The research says that the violence comes from fatherless families. It's when fathers aren't there. And if they had to deal with that somehow, I think that would also turn them on their head. They couldn't deal with that.
And it's one of the things is that these people actually, with a straight face, look people in the eye and say, we study the experience of men and masculinity. All right, then show me one paper on father absence.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
I mean,
Never
that's
happened.
the problem we're facing now is father absence.
They
It's
are
the problem.
lying. They're just lying
Yeah.
about what they're there for. They're there to further the feminist narrative. That's what they've been hired to do. That's what their careers are based on. And that's all they're going to do. They don't give a damn about men and men's issues.
Maybe it's Stockholm syndrome, you know?
I don't know if I can give
Well-
them that much credit.
You know, at a certain point, I think, yes, self-hatred must play a role in some of the most zealous ideologues.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hatred of, and I think, you know, one does find that on most movements of the far left that have, you know, a utopian revolutionary edge to them, that in which the entire structure of our present civilization has to be torn down and remade from the ground up. And part of that is deeply hating both your own self and your own, you know, everything about your society.
Right.
So I think that must be there.
That's interesting.
And it allows one to ignore the overt contradictions in, you know, even at the most basic level of the ideology one is propounding, like you were just pointing out there, Tom. I mean, we hear that all the time in feminism, that, oh, it's not that we criticize, we're not saying men in themselves are bad, it's how they've been socialized
Right.
by our
Right.
patriarchal society. But then you say, well, who's doing the socializing? You know, it's more and more, we have single mother households. We have young people being taught by all female teachers, you know, right up until, well, till the time they graduate. And so who exactly is socializing them
Really?
to be toxic in their masculinity? It's mostly women.
Really?
It's their male peer groups. That's the only influence they recognize.
That's interesting, though, Janice. The whole, you know, it has to be redone from the bottom up, must reflect the same kind of attitude towards oneself. I need to be taken down and rebuilt from the bottom up. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Ugh, that's a bad one.
Yeah, it's horrible. And when you hate yourself and your society to that extent, you certainly don't want to affirm another man in his masculinity. You want to tear that down too and make him weak and vulnerable, just like you feel.
Right. Exactly.
I will say that I just don't think it's possible that these guys can do this, the way that they tear their fellow men down, and the implications that all men are bad, men behave badly. We all know this, that sort of thing. That is people with no core values,
Seems like
no
it, doesn't
core
it?
principles at all. They will take a pat on the head from feminists because it's the only external validation that they're going to get. But these guys don't have any core beliefs, and they certainly don't even understand the fundamentals of mental health provision. just the basic rules of how you regard people, the way you treat them, what you're there for, what your limitations are, places you shouldn't go, your ideology being one of them. And that they just have absolutely no compunction about throwing all of that right out the window and going full throttle for their narrative. So I don't want to feel any sympathy for these guys. I think they're bad people.
Yeah.
I really
well, I
believe
mean, if you say right on your website that you approach working with men as and that what you attend to, one of those bullet points said that it was attentive to the way that men oppress other peoples. Like that, I don't know. There's just no words for that. That the person who's supposed to be helping you is looking at you as a member of an oppressor group who is somehow responsible, regardless of your personal circumstances, for the pain of others, and that is the primary lens through which this therapist is regarding you. Wow.
Yeah.
Say, oh, you haven't seen your children in 4 years?
Yeah.
Well, we can't talk about that. We need to talk about how you oppressed your ex. That's probably what's at root here. Well, it was the NOMAS, the National Organization of Men Against Sexism.
Oh boy.
Who called fathers' rights activists an abuser's lobby and contended on their website that the only reason men would seek custody was so they could continue to abuse their children.
God.
Yeah, I mean the dehumanization couldn't get more complete, and to think that ideology has actually taken over the dominant American organization for men's psychotherapy. It's just
sad.
Yeah,
and
wow.
shocking. Yeah, I agree. Sad note indeed. On a good note, it looks like Warren Farrell's going to be with us next week. Is that right?
That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, because Warren is someone who has not fallen for that crap. At least not completely. Warren has stood up for what he thinks. So we're looking forward to seeing him next week.
Yeah, Warren is a very interesting man.
He is.
What's that, Paul? He is. I just said I didn't want to get into reading his email, but he was part of all that exchange that I read excerpts from. And he was very supportive of the dialogue that I was putting out there.
Yes.
And trying to encourage this guy to pay attention to what he was hearing. Of course, obviously scared the living shit out of him. So
right. But Warren's a mature man. He is. He's a mature guy, and gotta love him for that.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, man.
That and a few other things.
Indeed, like the myth of male power.
Yeah.
What a book! Oh my gosh. So are we finished?
I think we're done.
I think we are.
Just remember that you don't need any bullshit men are bad therapy. Matter of fact, it's all in all likelihood you don't need therapy at all. Well, what you need is connection to other men who don't think you're a piece of shit. Imagine that.
Really? It's pretty healing.
And that's something we can provide you right here at Regarding Men.
It's very healing.
Every day.
Indeed.
Yes, it is wonderfully healing.
Yep. Yes. So, men
are
good.
And on that note, and with Nandor singing, we'll see you next week. You all take care.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.